Huge inflation? How is affecting my life? Inflation is a confusing word that many people aren't familiar with, but it's a very important part of the economy. Inflation is when the prices for goods and services in an economy increase over time. This might cause your paycheck, savings, or investments to lose their buying power. But what causes inflation? What is inflation? Inflation is the increase of prices over time. Prices are generally measured in terms of a percentage change from one year to the next. For example, if prices rose 3% from one year to the next, that would be considered an inflation rate of 3%. The most common cause of inflation is an increase in the cost of goods and services. This can be caused by factors like increases in wages, prices for raw materials, and interest rates. Other causes can be things like currency depreciation or government spending. Inflation affects everyone differently based on their individual circumstances. For example, someone with a high fixed income, like a pension, will see their purchasing power decrease more than someone without a fixed income. Someone who spends a lot of money on luxury items, like cars, will see their costs go up faster than someone who doesn't. There are several ways to fight or try to control inflation. Monetary policy, by changing interest rates or printing new money; fiscal policy, by investing in infrastructure or cutting taxes; and trade policy, by enforcing tariffs. Some economists believe that increasing automation could lead to more price deflation rather than inflation, but this has yet to be proven. How does inflation affect my life? Inflation is a decrease in the purchasing power of money over time. When the cost of goods and services goes up, people's income decreases, which can have a negative effect on their lives. Here are some ways inflation affects your life. Your wages may not keep up with the increasing prices, which can lead to a decrease in your standard of living. You may have to borrow more money to cover costs, which can increase your debt burden and make it harder to get out of debt. You may be required to pay higher taxes due to inflation-driven increases in government revenue. Purchasing power may be reduced for everyday expenses such as groceries, gasoline, and housing. Pros and cons of economic inflation. Inflation is one of the most common and feared economic indicators. While some people see it as a sign of prosperity, others view it as a harbinger of financial ruin. So what is inflation, and what are its pros and cons? What is inflation? In simple terms, inflation is the increase in the price of goods and services over time. It can be caused by several factors, including increased production, increased demand, or decreased availability of goods or services. How is it affecting my life? For most people, inflation is an inevitable part of life. It's something that we have to live with, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Inflation affects our finances, our purchasing power, and our overall quality of life. Here are 3 examples. 1. Inflation eats away at our savings account balance over time. As prices go up, our money goes further down in value. This means that even if we have a healthy savings account balance now, inflation will gradually erode it over time unless we do something to protect it. 2. The value of our investments decreases over time due to inflation. This means that the value of our investments will decrease faster than inflation, even if we're disciplined about investing. 3. How much we can afford to spend and save at any given time is determined by how much money we have in savings, thus how long we can go without spending more. This means that the less money we have to work with, the less flexibility we have to make ends meet in the future. If you want more examples of how inflation affects you and your family, read on. 1. The cost of living increases over time. This means that we need to save more money to support ourselves in the future, and sometimes this means taking a pay cut to do it. This can also mean that we have less discretionary spending money to put toward our investments. 2. What we spend and save becomes less valuable over time because inflation erodes the purchasing power of the dollar. For example, if you borrow $100 against your 401k rollover at 7% interest and face 15% inflation, you will end up with only around $90 in principal, net of taxes. What happened to the U.S. economy during the recession? The U.S. economy went into a recession in 2008 and has been slowly recovering since then. The National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, defines a recession as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. It is worth noting that the NBER only considers periods of at least 6 months in length to be recessions. The most recent data from the U.S. Department of Commerce shows that the U.S. economy has only recovered about half of its lost output from the recession. This means that there still remains significant economic uncertainty in the U.S. What causes inflation? Inflation is caused by an increase in the prices of goods and services. This can be caused by a number of factors, such as an increase in the amount of money that is available, an increase in demand for goods or services, or a decrease in the amount of available supplies. How is inflation affecting my life? Inflation can have a negative impact on people's finances and their overall quality of life. For example, inflation can cause people to lose money when they are trying to save for retirement or buy a house. It can also make it more difficult for people to afford food and other essentials. Pros and cons of a inflationary economy. Pros of an inflationary economy. 1. It stimulates the economy and can lead to job growth. 2. It makes goods and services more affordable for consumers, which in turn leads to increased spending and more jobs. 3. It helps reduce the national debt since government revenues rise along with prices, and debt payments become smaller over time. 4. Inflation can help stabilize the value of money, which is helpful for people who invest in stocks or other forms of property. 5. It can make it easier for governments to borrow money, since investors are willing to pay higher interest rates for bonds that are backed by inflation-protected currencies. 6. When prices rise faster than wages, companies are able to increase their profits without having to raise prices on their products very much, which benefits both consumers and businesses alike. 7. In an inflationary environment, people tend to spend more money because they believe that their money will be worth more in the future, a phenomenon known as inflation anticipation bias. Pros and cons of a recession. During a recession, your income may be lower and your expenses may be higher. When people are out of work, they have less money to spend. This affects companies as well as individuals. The prices of goods and services go up, which means that people's incomes go down even further. The downside to a recession is that it can make it harder to get back on your feet if you lose your job. It can also make it harder to save for the future, especially if you're already struggling to save money. A recession can also cause a decrease in the amount of money coming into an economy, which means that people have less to spend on things like food and gas. As you can see from the chart above, recessions are not all that common in the United States. Only about once every 50 years does the country go through what is called a double-dip recession. In fact, most economists believe there will not be another double-dip recession for at least 15 years. Another way of looking at it is this: with each passing day, the national debt grows larger and larger, as does tax revenue collected by government officials trying to pay back their loans from past recessions. Thanks for watching. See you on the next episode.